What's good, YouTube? It's me, Squiddy, back in the video. So we just had the WCQs wrap up, including the 2,000 person Euro WCQ, which is probably the biggest tournament that we can refer to for our own North American WCQ that's happening in Raleigh this weekend. And it was pretty crazy. So I just want to quickly do a quick recap to see what to expect at the North American one. If I'm not mistaken, I actually feel that Kashtira is actually a really powerful deck. But before we kind of talk about that, let's just take a look at the ones that were chosen to go to Worlds. So we have a couple of Kashtiras, I think they're around 3 Kashtiras. And the thing is, the top are from the actual championships, and then the bottom is from the world qualifying points where you had to grind it out, and then the top 16 kind of have a duke it off for a playoff. The playoff was, I believe, 16 players or 32 players, and then it was 32, I think, because they actually had 16 people from 2019 when COVID happened, so they actually carried that over because they didn't have the tournament. So those people were able to duel it out, and then the top 4 would play in a cutoff after 5 rounds of Swiss, and then the 2 that won from that top 4 would go to Worlds. So it's kind of interesting here. Up here in the European Championships, we have 2 Kashtira, 1 Labyrinth, 1 Rika, which is really interesting. Sprite, Live, Runic, and the Kashtira in the LatAm Championships, they just love playing like Sprite decks, like Adventure Sprite and all that stuff is always coming out there. So it's kind of interesting. And then the World Qualifying Points, because it was only like a smaller tournament, a lot of these decks aren't, I wouldn't take the representation from here to be like more concrete than what happened in the European Championship, like the actual tournament, because that's like obviously a 12-round plus tournament, so you can really see the consistency of decks. Whereas the World Qualifying Points, it's literally like under 10 rounds, right? We're talking about 5 rounds of Swiss plus like 2 more rounds, if they get that far. So we have like random decks like Labyrinth, Runic, Labyrinth, Sprite. Whereas I think Kashtira is just more consistent and more resilient across a bigger tournament. So you can kind of see the differential there. And then we also have like a nice little map here. Shout out to the person that made this actually in Zodiac. So we can kind of see like the total number of tops across the 4 weeks with the regionals, YCS nationals, and WCQs. Honestly, I think I would have preferred that they just left out regionals because those are a little hard to juggle. Some of them are smaller, and also local players. You can never really say if it's like super competitive, but obviously nonetheless this is good data. So we have 81 Kashtira, 69 Sprite. So I imagine the sprites are a combination of the Runic and all the different Furhire builds, Live Twin, so on and so forth. But you can see that Kashtira is still taking like a large representation because of how consistent it is, how resilient it is. The deck can play lots of non-engine. You obviously brick from time to time, but that's just like a high roll. That's just how the deck is. It's a high roller deck where you have to basically bank on not bricking and being able to play. And anytime you can play, you actually have a very good possibility of winning, going first or second, because the deck is just able to play so many powerful non-engine cards, able to make use of their cards, and then they trade really well into things like hand traps that are neg-1s for the opponent. And then you can also see here that there's significantly less representation for the other rogue decks, but one thing that actually caught my eye was purely, I think that a lot of good players are actually on this for the North American WCQ that are coming up, because this deck has a really good matchup against Kashtira. If you go second, you're able to break their board really easily with all your non-engine and then stick like a double Zeus, which is crazy and really hard for Cash to get rid of. And on top of all of that, if you go first, you do have the 33% chance, assuming you don't brick, to hit the Delicious Memory, which probably means purely Nor. On top of that, you also have the Trap card. So even if you don't have 5 materials under X purely Nor, like even though the X purely Nor with like 4 materials, so 2 activations, and then you get to draw 2 cards because you get to draw 1 and stand by, and then 1 when you flip your trap, is still powerful enough to win against Kashtira, right? Because Kashtira relies on their monsters, and if you're getting like +2 off of 1 X purely Nor, you're probably gonna win. So that deck actually is really underrated. And then we also have like a breakdown total number of wins in the 4 weeks. So you can see that Kashtira actually has 7 wins, which is crazy, as opposed to the other decks, which are very short. I'm a little surprised it's Vanquish, so I guess this is all regionals or something. So maybe don't take this for to be the source of all truth, but you can see that Kashtira is still winning by a large differential. And then even in the deck breakdown, top 64 for the Euros. So we had about 30% out of top 24, which I believe would equate to about probably 18 Kashtira decks or so. Dragon Link actually really surprising, because you can see here that they are actually 16%, so trailing behind Kashtira. I think Dragon Link and Kashtira both had really good conversion, whereas you can see that Labyrinth actually had poor conversion. It's not even in this top 6 chart here, so it's kind of sad to see that. Deck is, people are starting to figure out how to side against them, how to play around that deck, so I think it's a lot worse than it actually is. And then Runic actually is surprisingly in 3rd place. I would have thought it would trail it behind the Kashtira, because that encompasses all the Sprite decks. But you can see there are a couple of Rika decks and Floanderies. I think Rika had a really good conversion rate because there weren't a lot of people playing it. And shout out to Jessica for winning with that deck, because that deck is actually really, really terrifying. If you guys don't know how to play against it, definitely check that out. Me and Tombox did a video, so you guys can kind of look into that. But I think the deck will not actually be played in North America because it's weird. It's almost like a Euro deck. The thing with North America is that you guys have to understand the players here are a lot different than the Euro players. They like to play things that are more safe. They like to play things that are already established in the meta. The North American circuit is very competitive, so typically, either players are following the meta trends, following what the best players are doing, or they're innovating, but they're innovating in a way that is already, I think, pre-existing decks. So I would say that the good players that are actually innovative are actually probably going to be playing purely because they realize that that has a good matchup against Kashtira, and then also has a decent matchup against other decks, just making use of Zeus, being able to go first and second. And a lot of decks are actually cutting cards to deal with Expert Lenore, so like Kaijus and stuff. So it's really, really hard to get rid of an unaffected Expert Lenore. And then the rest of the database, I actually think a lot of people will be playing Kashtira because they probably realize that this deck has been just topping, getting to the finals of basically every WCQ up until now, if not winning. So they're probably going to realize that. And I think a lot of North American players are actually going to play Kashtira. So if you guys are playing Cash, expect mirror matches. If you're not playing Cash, expect to side heavy hate for that deck, because I think it will definitely be the most popular deck. I don't think a lot of players are actually going to be playing Runic Sprite. I feel like Euro players are very... they like playing like decks that they see on streams. For example, Joshua Schmidt was playing like the Runic Sprite and stuff. And then after that, I saw a lot of players in the German Nationals were just playing that deck because they just like watching them play it, I guess, and they got an inspiration. And I feel like Euro players like have the tendency to play like decks that are different than North American players, so I think that we're going to expect a lot of Kashtira. But that being said, there'll still be some Runic Sprites, still be a lot of Dragons, still be a lot of other decks, but I just feel like Kashtira is going to be like the deck to beat, and I think it's going to win the event because of how resilient, how concise it is, and if players in North America have always played that way, where they've been playing decks like Kashtira up until now, so they have a lot of practice with it. They're very well versed. It's not like they're picking it up at the top of the format. This is like the tail end of a double format that we already had where they survived the ban list. So I think actually this deck will be very heavily represented in the North American WCQ. So yeah, I just wanted to make a quick little recap video talking about that. What do you guys think though? What do you guys think is going to win? What do you guys think we should be preparing for? Am I right or wrong here talking about Kashtira being the best deck for North American WCQ and the most represented? Let me know below in the comments. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.